Let's switch to Social Security, which is obviously an incredibly important program, and we want to do everything we can to honor those promises. I've got some charts that we're going to put up on the screen here. Are we ready with those? This is from the Social Security Administration. I hope you'd acknowledge these are accurate. That over the next 20 years, basically, Social Security will run a cash deficit of $5.1 trillion. Now, I've certainly made the point publicly that I don't believe this is a sustainable, first of all, a solvent program. The only reason anybody can claim that is the fiction of the Social Security Trust Fund. I mean, it's true that we ran the surpluses, accumulated over more than $2.5 trillion, but the problem is the Social Security Trust Fund holds an asset called U.S. Treasury bonds, which in the hands of the federal government really has no value. It's the same thing as if you had $20, spent it, and that money's spent, it's gone. Wrote yourself a pretty note, said $20, stuff in your pocket, and say, hey, I got 20 bucks. I mean, you don't. You just have a piece of paper that you have to basically offer somebody else and entice them to give you $20 in exchange for that promissory note. I mean, would you acknowledge that point?
Senator, when I think about the trust fund and those commitments, I do think about those commitments in the context of the commitments that we actually make in the public markets. And I also think about it in the terms of hearkening back to the years when I had the opportunity to work on balanced budgets, that there was the creation of something called the Social Security lockbox. And so while those...
Let me just say, do you think that has value to the federal government? Do you believe the trust fund has value to the federal government, that it can actually pay out and meet that $5.1 trillion deficit?
What I think it has is value to the trust fund and the ability that there is a commitment that we will pay. Okay, so
let's go to the next couple slides here. This comes from the Office of Management and Budget's 2010 Analytical Perspective. Can we put the next one up here? Next slide. Hit it. Anytime. We have a technical problem here. Okay, let me paraphrase. These balances, referring to the trust fund, are available for future benefit, but only in a bookkeeping sense. They are not assets of the government as a whole that can be drawn down to fund future benefits. It goes on to say, basically, they're claims on the Treasury. So, in general, when you're talking about a consolidated statement, you have Social Security Trust Fund. It holds $2.6 trillion worth of bonds. But on the other hand, you have the U.S. Treasury Department that has the liability. So you have an asset on one hand, liability on the other, and the Office of Management of Budget, when you consolidate those statements, claims that nets to zero. So my point is, as the Director of Office of Management and Budget, would you acknowledge that to the federal government, the Social Security Trust Fund has no value in terms of paying off that $5.1 trillion of deficit spending over the next 20 years?
But as we consider our deficit numbers, these commitments are in the consideration as we think about our long-term.
Does it have any value? Is there any value drawn out of that Social Security Trust Fund to fund the $5.1 trillion worth of promised benefits? Do you believe that has any value to the federal government? Are you disputing what OMB has basically published here?
What I do believe is it has value in terms of the trust and how we think about the trust. The first chart, I think, didn't actually...
It has no dollar value. There are no dollars there. There's nothing of value to pay those benefits. Isn't that correct?
I think, though, when we think about the issuance of debt that we do on a regular basis in the public markets and in terms of how we think about that as well. So right now we have a very large deficit. There are investors all over the world purchasing that debt. And the question is that... How do we think about that?
So basically, we've made promises to seniors, which we're going to honor, but the only way we honor those promises is for the Treasury Department to basically increase taxes on the American public or float more bonds. There's nothing that they can cash in from the Social Security Trust Fund that has any value to pay those benefits. Isn't that correct?
So until 2033, at that point, that's the point where the interest of these investments stop. In the earlier chart, am I right?
But these investments are worth zero to the federal government. That's my point. Social Security Trust Fund will give those bonds, and then how does the federal government fund those bonds? How do they make the payment on those bonds?
They make the payment. The trust fund has been self-funding for many years. As you reflected in the chart, there comes a time and point where that shifts, and then we draw down on the assets. Because
how do you pay off those assets?
Senator, with all due respect, you're here over your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Burwell.
Senator